everybody. Welcome to another episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. I'm Zach Loafman, here as always, and with me, of course, is Mr. Matt Most. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Zach?
I am doing well. I am very much looking forward to tonight's conversation. Our guest tonight is John Lassiter, and we're going to be talking about Montane milk snakes and keeping colubrids, a little bit of field herping. It's going to be a good combo. But before we get to that, of course, we have our housekeeping, what's happened since the last time we recorded. And as always, a bit of a blur, but a little bit tamer than the previous 2 weeks before recording with Jennifer. I don't really have much to report. The babies, for the most part, have hatched, with the exception of, as always, about 45 false water cobra eggs are still in the incubators, waiting to go. New additions for me. Travis Wyman graciously sent me a pair of a badass group of snakes, Oligodon purpurescens, kukri snakes. And he hatched out some of those. So these are captive born. A lot of times they come in as imports and they're a little bit psychotic, for lack of a better word. These guys are nice and chill. I haven't fed them yet. They're still kind of getting in, but those are my new additions. But otherwise, right now I'm just kind of doing the pre-brumation feeding regime of trying to build up a little bit of fat in some of the females that drop that I want to go again, and then just getting everybody ready for that, because it won't be long before we're putting things down for the winter. So that's me, Matt. What's up with you?
Well, I'm pretty much kind of in the same boat. I mean, I think I have a total of 10 or 12 clutches still left to hatch. A lot of those are the later species in the year, the Vietnamese mandarins. Still waiting on 4 more clutches of file snakes to hatch out. Some capes, some cross-eye. I actually have some capes actually midway out of the egg today, so that's pretty cool. But other than that, I mean, really it's kind of winding down in terms of the collection itself. We're starting to see some seasonal change. Hopefully it's not going to be as erratic as last year's temperature change, because I kind of follow the barometric pressure here in the Midwest and kind of cycle my animals accordingly and start to cool things down respectively as a result of that. Last year, obviously the weather went up and down, and I'm sure John will talk about this even too within Texas in terms of kind of cycling his animals. But it's just one of those things where hopefully things start to moderate a little bit easier, especially with this climate change that we're all going through. But even in terms of availability of animals, I mean, a lot of things have moved a lot faster than in years past just because of the higher demand in colubrids over the years. Mm-hmm. So that being said, I mean, I think we're ready to get into this conversation. What do you think?
Yeah. I agree 100%. I do want to say one thing, though, before we jump into that, about the demand for colubrids, because this is nice. So my local show is the Pittsburgh monthly show, and it was today. And I normally go to the show just for feeders and things like that. And I took my son. We went up there this morning, actually, and I was pleasantly surprised, because as I walked and looked at tables, what is normally nothing but a never-ending sea of crested geckos and ball pythons, there were colubrids on tables. And I can't tell you how long it's been since there was some diversity on those tables. And it wasn't just corns and kings, not that there's anything wrong with that, because they're wonderful. But I actually picked up a Pinellas Florida King today, which is this really cool integrade phenotype that I've been looking for forever. And the fact that I was able to get a subadult at the Pittsburgh show kind of blew my mind. But at the same time, there were blackneck garter snakes. Like, you never see that kind of unique thing anymore when you go to a show. So it was a pleasant feeling to walk out the door thinking, wow, there was like diversity there. And I think that definitely speaks to the point you just made, where a lot of people are talking about colubrids coming back. And if it's impacting my show in Pittsburgh, it's definitely going to be impacting people in other places. So that's nothing but a good thing. So on that token, yeah, Matt, we are definitely going to jump into this. So our guest tonight is John Lassiter of Coastal Bend Captive Breeding. John has been in the herpetoculture game for a while, which is great. We love having people on the podcast that have a bit of history. We were talking before we started recording about going on the forums with Kingsnake.com in the 90s. And if you're on those forums, you're definitely one of the originals, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh,
People listening to this thinking, what the hell is that? They're still available, by the way. You can go there and mine them for information. But John's, if he had a specialty, because he's got a very diverse collection, it would definitely be Montane Kingsnakes. Montane milk snakes. So if Kingsnakes, yeah, I was right the first time, corrected myself. So John's here. How you doing, John?
Very good. How are y'all?
We're doing great. So the first question we always ask, standard question when you're on a podcast, what was your start in reptiles? Have you always been doing this? This just start recently?
No, I'm going to my history right away. I grew up on 100 acres in a little town called Rockport, Texas, on the Texas coast. We moved there when I was like 6, so that was like 1977. And my dad was the only good snake is a dead snake type of person, and I wasn't. So I would get up when the sun came up, came home when the sun went down. My parents didn't care, so I was out shooting things and finding reptiles. I probably found 12 Texas scarlet snakes when I was a kid. They can't be found anymore, hardly at all. I think 2 have been found in the last decade. So the first snake I ever caught and kept was a emery eye rat snake, which we didn't know they were Milmorum back then in Rockport. And brought it in, fed it, kept it for like a year, and it passed away on me. It was huge. Then I started finding all the water snakes in our area, and my dad was a mobile mechanic, so all of the winter Texans used to come down to Rockport to fish and get away from the cold, and they all stayed at Mustang Island State Park or Goose Island State Park, which are parks near where I lived. And one day I went in there and was talking to the rangers, and he gave me a couple of pamphlets because I didn't know to go buy books at 7 years old, 8 years old. By the way, I used to help my dad. He believed in child labor. And I learned all of the venomous versus non-venomous snakes. So when me and my dad were out fishing and hunting and he would want to kill something, I would go pick it up and say, no, it won't hurt you. So from then on, I was hooked. I mean, there was a little time during high school and college. I really didn't keep anything, but I read a lot then. I went to UT Arlington and got to see, that's where I went to school, played baseball and ran out of money and went to work. But anyway, I got to see all of the pickled, jarred reptiles and amphibians and learned a lot there. And then when I got back out of college and was working, I got the Texas Field Guide and moved to a town 40 miles north of Rockport, Corpus Christi, Texas. And me and my buddies spent 3 or 4 years finding everything in the Texas Field Guide in our area.
Oh, that's cool.
And got hooked from then. Like I told y'all earlier, I found a clutch of eggs in '93 and learned how to hatch them just by reading books. This was before the internet. And hatched out 13 Milmorum, sold them to San Diego Zoo, and been hooked ever since. So once you see eggs hatching out of the egg, I think that's what made me addicted. So I'm still here. What was that? 93 to now, 29 years later, 28 years later, still doing the same thing. But I still mainly do field herping. I don't have the huge collections I used to have back in 2010 when I was up to like 300 breeders and who knows how many subadults. I try to keep my collection around 200 animals, including subadults and hatchlings now, unless I hatch a lot and I try to get rid of them quickly. But that's where I am.
No, I think that's really cool because, you know, John, yourself, even talking about the change in the internet and how that really changed the hobby itself. You know, even talking to some of the more experienced senior keepers in our hobby, you know, when they talk about reptile shows and things like that back in the 80s, 90s, I mean, it's not what we see today. I mean,
yeah, back then it was 90% colubrids, and there were a few ball pythons and Burmese and retics. at some tables, but in my niche of the hobby, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I think colubrids are what started everyone wanting to breed things in captivity, because that's what we have here in our nation, in our where we live. So all I saw was colubrids at the first shows I went to. I had people like Michael Price, Don Shores, and Don Soderberg as my mentors. So, which are great guys, good mentors to have. And I've seen. So, what really got me addicted to online stuff, I was talking to you already about this too. I think it was 95 when everyone got Windows 95 and everyone got a computer in their home. And back then we had to guess what websites were. So we would just play around and type in everything. So one day I typed in kingsnake.com just to see what would come up. And I saw Jeff Behringer's site. I saw the Alterna page, which really hooked me. The Alterna page was the first time that I was really wanting to leave where I lived to go look for snakes. So I saw all these pictures of all these different Alterna that were all over West Texas, and it told you the locales. Well, it told you the roads, kind of like iNet does now, but not as bad. But in '98, I finally started going to snake shows and buying breeding. Or no, '96, I started going to snake shows and buying breeding stock. And '98, I started herping all over the place and collecting breeding stock. And '97 was my first year of ever producing snakes without finding eggs like I did back in '93. And it was some of the toughest ever. Some people still have problems with them. And it was Lampropeltis leonis, it was Lampropeltis alterna, and it was Californiae. So I had a fun time catching lizards. And we didn't know about boiling and braining. I was just catching lizards, feeding lizards, scenting with lizards for probably a decade before I learned all the other tricks.
So, John, I mean, in terms, I think you kind of answered this, but would you say basically the fact of colubrids being in high numbers here within the United States, that's kind of what drew you in or made your focus within that colubrids area?
Of course, me being a field herper, even before I knew what herper meant, I was snake hunting. Before I even knew what that meant, that was my passion, was finding what we had locally. And then I got into breeding what we had locally. Then I bought books and learned about all the other species that I didn't know about and started getting them. Colubrids on a whole, I mean, I've seen the hobby go from colubrids were top of the line animals. I bought a ball python once for $12. and then 3 years later, a buddy of mine saw it and said, "Oh, that's a blackback." I didn't even know what that was, but I traded him for a milk snake because I wanted a milk snake. So, yeah, I've seen it go from colubrids to ball pythons, and I see a lot of these ball python breeders that thought they were going to make a lot of money, but they were still passionate about animals or reptiles, so they stayed in it. And now they're I see a lot of them coming to colubrids and buying colubrids, maybe not for the money aspect. I think those are the ones that are truly passionate about keeping reptiles.
Now, do you keep anything else outside of the king snakes, or?
Well, I have over the years. Right now, it's just king snakes and rat snakes and milk snakes. I mean, Mexican milks are my favorite because they're the locality gem down here. And I have milmorum rat snakes, thorn scrub rat snakes. I have some nice beard eye rat snakes that I've collected and trying to get them going. This was here recently. And then Trans-Pecos rat snakes are probably the most abundant snake that I see in West Texas besides Atrox, and I have a few of them. Sorry, Zach.
That's insane. I'm sorry. I never thought someone would say that. So, no, that's pretty cool. Huh. I didn't realize that.
Other than that, I mean, I used to keep a Croatian Situla, Loxocemus, South Korean Diomes, Neanticolas, Depii, and Geni. But I decided.
Yeah, because I acquired your Korean Diomes too.
You did?
That's got to be what now?
2012.
Yeah, I want to say it's been years now.
Yeah. There's a couple of people that got them. Did you get my adults or just babies?
No, I bought your adults from you.
Oh.
Because that's when I ended up getting on your wish list for the Applegate specials too.
Ah, you still want those? I'm just kidding.
No, and even kind of like going into a segue on Applegate, I mean, many people, if they haven't looked or knew about history, I don't think a lot of people even knew about Applegate's collection at one time being kind of split up or divided amongst many people. Something that, I wanted to talk about a little bit here in terms of kind of showcasing like how the transfer of lineage and knowledge kind of proceeds from one keeper to the next and how the hobby kind of brings it full circle too. I don't know, John, if you wouldn't mind kind of bringing some of that history in terms of, I know you didn't get all of Applegate's animals, but.
Well, I could mainly talk about just the Applegate Special Pyromelena. I knew Bob before all this happened, so I used to drink beer with him at the Daytona show and hear all the funny stories. So when Bob decided to get out, he produced his last snakes in 2016, which a lot of people don't know that he produced some Applegate specials in 2016. His webmaster was Thomas Muniak, and Willie Moran got every snake he wanted to sell except for his last Pyro Breeders, which was 2.8, and his last Pyro Clutches, which was 2.4 or 1.4, sorry. So Thomas made a deal with him and got those. I really didn't need to get the lineage from Thomas because I already knew that they derived from Huachuca mountains, which are the old Lampropeltis, Pyromelena, Woodeni, however people want to say it. And I took them from Tom because Tom wasn't doing good in health-wise, and on a breeding loan have been keeping and breeding them for 3 or 4 years now. He got them in 2017, and I got them in 2017 or 2018. Willie has all the other cool stuff like his albino annulata and his old splotched and albino Sinaloan. I don't know what else happened to his collection. I know he offered it to a lot of people, like my buddy Chris Sharp was offered and a few others, but all I know is Willie and Thomas got the majority, and I ended up with the Applegate's specials.
Very cool. Very, very cool. So just to make sure that some of the listeners that are listening that might be like, and I don't know how you would ask this question, but it's possible. Who's Applegate? Could you just kind of give a little brief introduction as to who?
Who's Bob Applegate?
Yeah. Why are we nerding out over this?
Well, Bob, he's somewhat of a pioneer. There were pioneers before Bob, but Bob was one of the first to actually market his animals better than anyone. He bought wild caught and F1s from a lot of people. And so if you're a morph miner, that's a term I like to use. If you breed F1 to F1, you find out where the hidden traits are. If you produce just F1s and keep selling them, you never know until someone else produces them that you sold to, right? Mm-hmm. So he got a lot of F1s and wild caughts and popped out these strange things that selective propagation did instead of just breeding wild caughts together. So he did great with his splotched animals and his Applegate specials that he called hypo incorrectly. I don't want to. A cool story I had with him was because I'm a huge Mex breeder. Lampropeltis mexicana used to be Lampropeltis mexicana, San Luis Potosi Kingsnakes. He used to have some, and he sold all of them before he ever raised any up. And he sold them all because he was tired of people coming up to his table at Daytona saying those are the coolest Miami corns they've ever seen. Anyway, I got a hold of some from a couple of old buddies of mine, Bob Finja, if y'all ever heard of him, and Tommy Agosta, and Carl Dorflane of Boneyard Reptiles, because after a couple of years, the red saddles turned pink. And this is part of another story I want to tell later. I've been trying to write a book for 10 years, and I don't want to until I figure this out. But we're calling them hypoerytheristic. I probably bought out everyone in the nation except for one person I know of. So I have all of them. And I just released my first ones this year. But they all derive from Bob's stuff. Bob had some of the most unique stuff and one of a kinds, world's first kind of things than anyone I know in the king snake world, oak snake world, Lampropeltis world.
So sticking with the Lampropeltis theme, you've got Getula and Triangulum, and then the Pyros and all those. Why Montane Kings? Why is that the group that kind of grabbed your imagination, your passion, or is it really all of them? So
nothing's more variable than a Leonis. Nothing's more variable than a Alterna. So what got me was I can hatch a clutch with banded phase, Leonis phase, some yellow, some orange, some green, all in one clutch. And I found that the most thrilling thing to do. Yeah, the most thrilling thing that I could do was do that. So along with that, there were many other snakes that fit in my husbandry. My setup was Mex and Alterna and Greeri and Ruthveni Kingsnakes, not Pituochus. But only thing we can't get is web eye, since Lacey Act of '84 kind of shut down any legal. There's a weird way to say that, legal smuggling, right? Because back in the day, it was still illegal. There was just no repercussions in the United States once you got them across.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's illegal even in the States because of the Lacey Act.
Gotcha.
But we've been dealt the hands we got on all the Mexican kings, so that's why we're seeing many strange looking patterns and colors that look nothing like the holotype or any of the wild caught that we've seen.
So with this group, I'd like to talk a little bit about the term Theri, because I read your article today, and I'll fully admit that this is a learning experience for me, because this is a group that I've not kept. So I'm green as green can be tonight. But when I was at Florida Tech, one of my jobs was to take care of the snake collection there, and it was really cool because the professor that was maintaining the snake collection, they were like the research animals, and then there were all these other animals that had nothing to do with pit vipers or pythons, because we were studying the pits, and they were just things that the professor liked to keep. And I distinctly remember back then, that would have been in 2003, that I was cleaning what felt like hundreds and hundreds of bins that had the word Theri written on there. So that was obviously an old taxonomic term, but now there's been some revisionary work and such, or what's the deal with that?
So we want to go way back in history. The first named animal from Nuevo Leon, king snake, Lampropeltis, from Nuevo Leon was the Lampropeltis leonis. Later, military guy by the last name of Thayer collected some there and sent them, I forgot to what zoo, but they renamed them Lampropeltis theri, Mexicana theri. And after years and years of people figuring this out, about a decade ago, people like Robert Hansen and Jerry Salmon, myself, and other herpetoculturists started calling them all Lampropeltis leonis, dropping the trinomial name and just go ahead and elevating them to their own species. The Mexicana Bible is what we call it, was written 2 years ago or 3 years ago maybe now, by Jerry Salmon and Robert Hansen, and elevated all of them to their own species status, dropping the misnomer Theri and calling them Lampropeltis leonis.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I remember breeding them, man, got to be like 7 years ago, and you would produce just odds and ends, just in terms of colorations, patterns.
They made me call in sick to work before. When they're hatching, you got to know what the next one looks like.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, cool. So,
Sorry.
So now that we've established that, we're going to talk a little bit about keeping these guys. So we've introduced. Well, before we get to the Applegate enclosure, what is your basic setup for one of these Montane Kings?
Keeping these Montane Kingsnakes, it's all about providing options. So in a tub, which I keep most of my snakes in 32 quart tubs, they're only 3-foot adults. So I believe that's plenty good for them. But to provide options, I keep my snake room at 74 degrees. I use back heat. I set that temp gun with the temp gun at 82 degrees. That way, if you keep it too hot, which ideal would be able to keep one side 50 degrees and the other side 110 degrees, but that's not possible typically. So 82 and 74 seems to work best so that they have a place to metabolize and a place to conserve. Instead of keeping them at the 80-degree ambient and they always want to eat and anything that moves, they bite. So you see a lot of people that ask that question, why does my snake bite? It's because you don't give them any lower temperature to conserve. They're always in the metabolizing mood. So I put in about 3 inches of aspen, 3 to 4 inches, so that I don't have to provide a hide. They can make tunnels and thermoregulate and be at any temperature they need to be. I put things on top of the aspen like plastic lid or paper plate or a newspaper so that they can come to the top and still hide. I sometimes, especially around shedding, I provide a moist hide with damp sphagnum moss. I don't have to provide this all the time because I live in South Texas on the coast and very high humidity. So the idea behind all of this is they can be in the back of the tub where the heat is and be at the very bottom of the substrate, and they're very dark, dry, warm. They can come up to the top and it's light, dry, warm. They can go over to the sphagnum moss and be warm, moist, dark, or light. They can come to the front of the tub and they can be either down low and be dark and dry and cool, or up top and they can be light and dry and cool. And then there's a water bowl where they can have that cool, moist on the cool side too. So when we get into the Applegate enclosure discussion, it kind of perfects that and isolates those way better than a tub would. And yeah.
Well, let's just jump right into the Applegate enclosure. So
Applegate enclosure provides all this by subfloor drawers. So I usually have they're 4 foot to 5 foot long by somewhere over 2 foot tall, 2 foot deep, and they have a hole drilled into the floor with a PVC tube going into 2 different containers. Applegate finally got them where they're all connected with bulkhead fittings that had like 4 or 5 different levels. But I have 2 containers, slide out tubs, drawers that are subfloor, and one of them's always dry and one of them's always damp. I've tried UV lighting, LED lighting, room lighting up above ground. I haven't seen the benefit of UV, but if provided and that's their heat source, definitely they're going to use it. I've read all the papers and understand that a lot of people have seen some benefit. Right now, I just use LED lighting in them or incandescent bulbs in them just for providing that light option. So when the snake is above ground, it has heat tape in the back also. So when above ground, they can be dry, bright, warm, or cool. Below ground in the wet side or damp side, they could be damp, moist, warm, or cool, and in the dark. And then on the dry side, they just added that dark option to the dry, warm, or cool. Also, the damp moss is a nest box for females.
Yeah.
And I've kept successfully, I don't recommend any new person doing this, but I've kept pairs and trios in there, no problem. Montane Kings aren't very cannibalistic, but if raised together, they live together well. Don't ever put two males in there, they'll fight. But a male with two females and a male with another female works just fine.
So I have some questions because this is pretty awesome. Because one of the things that you're supposed to do with one of the things that's pushed currently in herpetoculture is choice. And I don't think there's a colubrid in America that has more choice than a snake living in that setup where it can go cool, dark, dry, dark, light, blah, blah, blah. Do you see them like basking? Like, do you see them coiled up under lights? Or this group historically is primarily crepuscular and nocturnal, correct?
In my experience in the field, I think they're 99% nocturnal.
Yeah.
We may be able to get into this later, or I can say it now.
Go for it.
These snakes that live in rocks, they live in rocks 99% of their time. They might get close to the edge to get the radiation from the sun to metabolize meals. At night, I think they just come out on accident. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're shining rocks on a cut, and they just crawled out because they were crawling down a crack. So that's my only debate against UV with this type of snake. I mean, if you have a boa or a python or something like that, I'm sure they benefit from it, lizards especially. But these snakes that I have, I've never seen one out in the daylight, and I've only heard of one out in the daylight.
No, that's
well, and I think that kind of brings it like full circle, if you will, because everyone asks for a care sheet specifically to animals in terms of well, how do I need to keep this? And really, that's kind of the mint. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I have two different kinds of care sheets. Are you just going to be a keeper, or are you going to be a breeder? Right. Because we know y'all two know well that we don't go by a care sheet and weigh mice and snakes and feed them per, right? Because I have male snakes that go off feed in October and they don't eat again until June.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So they go through brumation, they get out of brumation, they might eat one or two meals after brumation, and then they breed and they don't think about anything else but breeding. They do not want to eat. And then when they're done breeding, they'll eat in June. So now what do I have? I have from June to August, September, and that's it to feed them. So
right.
I feed them heavily. A female out of brumation needs to eat way more than once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about kind of kings I'm talking about, or Montane Kings. So I feed heavily, like every 3 days out of brumation until I see ovulation. I don't wait for the first shed anymore, which I used to in years past. I think I've missed some ovulation windows by doing that, but I keep detailed spreadsheets because I'm a nerd, and I know all the durations of what they've done in years past, and I typically bring them out March 1st to March 15th. On April 1st, a lot of them get paired up because they're already ovulating. Sometimes we wait for that first shed, and that was probably, for some of my snakes, their pre-egg laying shed instead of their ovulation shed. So I just pair them all up April 1st, and some of them, they're not ovulating yet, and they do it right after that shed, but it's kind of like a 50-50 split with my collection. Sometimes the very first shed is their pre-oviposition egg laying shed.
That's crazy.
Well, and I think part of that even kind of plays into the field herping aspect, right? I mean, getting a better biological sense of experiencing, where these animals are naturally found, understanding them, even watching them in captivity, like, you mentioned in terms of the Applegate enclosures, watching what they're actually utilizing, whether it's in a rack, in a cage, just properly monitoring that and giving them choices. more
Right.
than anything.
And a lot of people don't know how to palpitate for follicles or see them swelling because they keep animals fat, right? I try to keep animals like I find them in the wild, which are usually, well, mine are a little heavier than the wild because usually when you find an Alterna in the wild, it's pretty skinny. Pyro's pretty dang skinny compared to how we keep them. I haven't had the luxury to find Mexicana in the wild because I don't go to Mexico. Anyway, one thing I wanted to say about the Applegate enclosure, last year I kept a pair of Applegate Pyros, or a trio, one male that was a visual special and two females that were het. And I got one female to double clutch, which I'd never done before in my life. I didn't do it on purpose. I just keep them together, right? The coolest thing about it is both clutches, 100% were all specials. 7 the first time, 6 the second. So I had 13 specials from a het by visual breeding, which was very strange. I don't know if the enclosure had anything to do with it. It was just luck, I guess. Hit the odds. But getting them to double clutch, I've never been able to do before. I think keeping them together all the time helps. Sometimes you don't want snakes to double clutch, but I'm pretty anal retentive and keep everything healthy.
You know, it's interesting you kind of bring up a point I don't think a lot of keepers even realize is some species actually do better by habituating them in that kind of setup where you have them in pairs year round. Like in years past when I've bred Persinum, I've always kept them together as pairs. They bred throughout the winter.
You know, the coolest thing I've seen is the male knows which one's going to ovulate first. The male will go hang out with the female they were brought out of brumation all at the same time. The male will go to one female and hang out with her the entire time. She's the first one to ovulate, first one to breed. As soon as he's done, he will go hang out with the other one, which I found interesting. And you don't see that when you keep them in separate enclosures, separate drawers.
No.
And a bunch of food in there. The male doesn't want to eat. It looks like, he's just letting the females eat, which I always thought was cool.
Yeah. No, and John, just to kind of go into a little bit more about like breeding, introductions, things of that nature. Do you keep 1-to-1 typically or pair 1-to-1 or do you do multiple males?
I never do backup males because I always want to know what male father to clutch. Right? Not everyone knows this, but a female can become gravid from more than one male. I proved it years ago with some speckled kingsnake. I had a albino female speckled king, and I bred it to a normal, and I bred it later to a het. And she laid like 15 eggs, and all of them were albino but one. So we know that we know the normal one at least fertilized one egg, and he wasn't het albino because I tested that too. So yeah, in my world, it's tough for a male to handle more than 3 females. Typically, it's 1-to-1. Pyros are quick though. I kind of time these things. I'm strange like that. Pyros are quick, so they can rejuvenate and breed multiple a whole lot more than say a Mex that hooks up for 20 hours sometimes.
Oh.
So stamina, yeah, I know. But yeah, when doing multiple females, it's a juggling act of separating, feeding one day, and a good trick is sometimes just the feeding kicks off the male. You throw a mouse in with the female right after she eats, throw a male in there, and he's ready to go. I usually don't have a problem with males just laying around not trying because I actually wait for ovulation instead of just trying too early or too late. So, feed them, separate, feed, put them back together. Separate, feed another female, put it back together. So every 2 or 3 days, it's hard to juggle them. And that's if they're all ovulating at the same time. So when you get females ovulating at different times, it's even worse because you don't know if the male is spent or not. But we keep going.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because And the reason I asked that is over the years, I've actually started to keep more males than females. And part of it is just to have surplus males in case you don't see a male cycling properly. This way you had someone to back up in terms of breeding.
I've heard that all my whole career of breeding is you can't have too many males, but I haven't seen the use for it as much as other people.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's always interesting, I think, from the hobby side where people always inquire about buying a trio, where I'm always like, well, what happens if the male dies? Now you have two females.
Right. Well, they never think about anything's going to perish.
Well, you work with life, you work with death. That's what I've always been told. So.
And the male's job in all this is to go out and actually instigate the breeding most of the time. So if you've got a dud male, you can have multiple ladies, but that means nothing in the grand scheme of things because they're not the ones that are instigating the breeding. So on this breeding topic, to back up just a little bit, with these guys, what's the whole brumation process look like? Is it a solid brumation or is it unique to them or typical colubrid? What's the deal on that front?
Well, first of all, I live in an area where it's over 110 degrees for 90 days straight. We might hit freezing once every other year. Last year was the exception and made up for it, but we were below freezing for a week and it messed up our entire city. But I have this thing called a Colubroid temperature controller. It is my best investment ever for these type of snakes. Back 20 years ago, I did it in a Southern ingenuity type of way by using a heat pad on the wall, and I pulled out the pitot tube or temperature sensor of a window unit air conditioner, and I adjusted the distance from this heat pad so that the air conditioner would overcool. The lowest setting on these window units that we have are 60 degrees, so I always want to hit 50 degrees. All the care sheets and everything say 55, but if you're breeding pyros or Zanata or Guiri, it usually doesn't work at 55. 48 to 50 is usually the best temps. So nowadays, the only problem I had with my old way of doing that is the coils would freeze up when it overcooled, so I had to go out there with a water hose and de-thaw it and get it going again, which was terrible because in the summer it could be 80 degrees here, so it warmed up to 80 while I was trying to cool it off or de-thaw it. So this Colubroid controller is made for deer hunters that want walk-in coolers in their ranch or things like that. So this will hold, depending on the unit size, I think mine's a 20,000 BTU. It'll hold my 2-car garage, and I had to test it this year for personal reasons. It'll hold my 2-car garage down to 50 degrees for 4.5 months, no problem.
That's cool.
And it has a little delay on it to where once the coil temperature, because you have a sensor on the coils, once the coil temperature hits 33, it'll kick off the compressor and keep the fan going, so it'll thaw it out. It'll never freeze. And it works great. So I've tried other ways. I built a big insulated box and slide it over a window unit, all kinds of ways, and this is a no-brainer. $300 investment made me thousands, right? So it is great. So I quit feeding probably mid-October. Everyone says 2 weeks on the care sheets, but I've seen snakes crap in brumation 2 months later, so I try to at least give them 6 weeks. Usually around Thanksgiving to December 1st is when I drop them down to 60 degrees. From 74 to 60. It takes a while for the room to get to 60, so there's no shock to them. A week after December 1st, I set it for 50 and nearly set it and forget it. I mean, I'll come in maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, and replace water bowls with fresh water. And then I warm them back up around March 1st to 60 degrees. And then March 15th, they're at 74, and only the females get the heat tape turned on. Right? The males at 74, since they are high elevation animals, they will digest. It just takes them longer. They will digest a meal. Females have that 82 degrees, so they can eat a lot and go hang out on the hot side. And then, like I said, I don't wait for a pre-ovulation shed. Just from data that I've collected over especially the last 5 years, is I put them together April 1st and they start breeding. Some of them don't, and I wait for that shed and they start breeding. Usually 6 weeks from ovulation to oviposition. They lay the eggs 6 weeks after they ovulate. And I take those, and I have it's not really unique because about 5 or 6 of us do it now that I know of. I use a closed system incubation for the eggs, where I use large granule perlite. I don't do the 1-to-1 ratio because that's too wet for these. These are Montane, low humidity animals, mainly in the desert also. It's amazing how dry it could be, and these eggs will hatch. A lot of dead-end eggs, I believe, are caused by drowning or non-brittleness of eggshells, too pliable, and they can't cut them. So I get it just damp enough because I use a closed system with no holes at all in this. And I put the eggs on top, lightly on top, none of it buried into the perlite. Put it on top, put the lid on it, and set it on my top shelf, which is about 78 to 80 degrees. So day 45 comes, and the tubs I've used before, I put tape over the holes. So I just pull the tape off the 4 little holes I have in there, or I pop 4 holes in the container. And a week after day 45, the eggs start dimpling. A week after that, they pip. I think the dimpling and the dryness and brittleness of the egg, of them finally drying out and getting oxygen, because they don't need oxygen until around the last week anyway. I am guilty of opening it up and checking on them in that 45-day period anyway, so I do open them up. But that dimpling and the brittleness of the eggs causes them to pip without any help. I know a lot of Alterna breeders that continuously get dead in egg, and they're still using damp, wet perlite, burying eggs. And I know why. I mean, I used to get 10 out of every 100 babies were DIEs, dead in eggs. Now it's like 1 to every 100.
You know, John, just in terms of this conversation, if you will, a couple of things that kind of pop up in my mind, or at least in terms of conversation here, is one, you mentioned about keeping males down and raising the temperature in terms of the males, and just thinking about their natural biology. I mean, where they're found, you know, do you think by keeping the males down for a few extra weeks actually helps the follicular development of the female, and that male sperm then is able to trigger that, ovulation, reproductive cycle to fertilize those ova?
You know, I never thought of it in that aspect. That's a great point. My whole thinking is I don't want them to be warm, because there's this, I don't know if it's a wives' tale or not, but males get warm, it's going to kill the sperm. But my question was always, well, once it's in the females and they go to the heat, it's not killing them. So I don't know if it's true or not. So my thinking is I never kept the males down longer for brumation. I don't know if I said that wrong earlier. I usually bring them out at the same time.
Okay.
Right? I have been known to bring in males out earlier so they don't smell the pheromones and shut down breeding, because I wanted to get some meals in them. But your thinking there has me intrigued, and I might try that.
Well, and it was just something when you were talking about how bringing up the females, it just kind of triggered in terms of the field biology sense of maybe the males are still hunkered down. The other thing in terms of
that, you go out to West Texas and look for Alterna, you're only going to find males wandering around that time of year usually.
Yeah.
You find more females like this time of the year that are trying to get meals before brumation.
Yeah.
Males are wondering.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, even talking to some field biologists in terms of finding eggs, you usually find 100% success rate.
Yep.
Right. Which is always interesting to
I was
me.
amazed here. A buddy of mine found a milk snake in the wild that was gravid, and it laid 4 good eggs and 1 bad. I'm like, wow, I've never heard of a wild snake laying a slug. They're always usually good.
Yeah. Well, and talking about that, you start to wonder about diet.
Yeah.
Like what you mentioned in terms of the animals that you found and things like that, where they're much more slender. You have to start to wonder, are we overfeeding these animals in captivity?
Oh, definitely. The only egg binding I've ever seen was from infertile eggs. I've never seen a snake egg bound with good eggs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it scares me when a 3-year-old pyro that's only, let's say, 24 inches long ovulates. Man, I almost want to just throw a male in on her just so they're good eggs so she don't egg bound. But I had 4 females just lay slugs that I didn't even pair them up because they were just undersized to me. But I'm sure in the wild, they breed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that these animals breed way sooner than we realize. But I also think that in herpetoculture circles, if you power feed and you push something, you can run into the problem you're talking about right now, which is if you get those animals to ovulate without the eggs getting fertilized, which happens, those ova are developed. They're essentially a mass that has to be pushed out, but they're not normal. And that's when you end up getting the egg binding.
Yeah, the one I was taught years ago is it's very, very hard to make a growing snake obese, right? Mm-hmm. Taking these calories, this meal, not only to sustain, but to also grow. So you can feed it every 3 days, and it's not ever going to get obese. It's just going to grow faster. An adult snake doesn't have much growing left to do, right? So it's going to pack on fatty deposits and things like that if you feed it too much.
Yeah, and a response of females to fat is get it out. And one of the ways you get it out is through pathways that lead to the development of those eggs. That's why our snakes probably double clutch in human care way more than they're double clutching in nature.
Right.
When I was working on the Dipsadded book, it was really kind of interesting because on this exact same topic, a lot of the scientific papers were talking about how it's not the same exact seasons in South America as it is here, but basically you have your kind of cool down in the wintertime, then you get your follicular development, what equates to a springtime, and then you get a clutch of eggs. And then what they were seeing is like they saw that a lot in the girls, but what they would see in the other animals was that late summer there were follicles kind of ready to go, but it was half the clutch size of what it was originally. Here with me, same, different species, but same topic, the water cobras, those animals are producing 60 eggs a year, which is insane. 230 egg clutches. And it's just because we're feeding them so much.
They become gravid being downwind of a male,
Yeah, yes, they do. They do. And they do sperm storage, which is also great. So I'm not going to let my breeders go next year, and I'm fairly positive I'm going to get fertile eggs out of at least one of them just by them storing.
Over winter sperm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I've seen it many times with these kings, a second clutch being laid fertile without reintroduction of a male, but I've never seen overwintering of sperm.
Yeah, it totally can happen. We'll get back to your Montane kings, but one day we'll talk about the process that goes down with, because I was totally blown away when I was reading some papers about some stuff. There was a well, just to whet the appetite of everybody, there was a musarana in a serpentarium in Brazil. It bred one time because it ate the male. So that's how we know that the male was gone. And that female laid like 3 clutches, and their third clutch was 2.5 years later. So
that's a lot of calories.
Yeah. But back to these guys. So babies, you get the babies, they hatch.
And then they're eating in the butt.
You said it, not me. I was just about to say. So are we like?
If you look at
harvesting lizards?
I'm only 20 years old with all this white hair, but I'm a bludgeon for punishment because this is all I've ever worked with. and there are 3,000 techniques, tricks, and you have to do them all because there's no golden bullet.
There's no golden bullet. They're their top 3, or is it just literally throw the kitchen sink and figure out what works?
Well, back when I used to have my website, I have these steps I go through. I always offer a frozen thawed first, regardless. If they take it, you're done, right? Then there's braining, then there's scenting, and there's a million ways to scent. And sometimes it takes the right lizard or the right scent. Rubbing it in the dirt sometimes works. But anyway, then there's scenting, and then there's boiling, then there's boiled brain, then there's live brain, then there's live, then there's wash with dish soap. There's all kinds of tricks I have to do. My freezer went out this winter, and I lost all my lizards, so I'm lizard hunting right now.
Is there one type of lizard?
And it's not a species thing on the snakes either. No, little brown skinks are like crack to a lot of things, so it helps a lot. Medgex helps on some, but not others. I throw live ones in there sometimes, and they kind of like snuggle up and sleep together. We have green anoles and brown anoles here in Corpus. I go out west to get Uda, Salophoros, whiptails, crevice spinies, all that, and use pieces of them, blended, make puree, make all kinds of things that are. My wife gave me a couple of blenders.
There you go. Nice.
But yeah, and it's not a species thing on a snake. Everyone says, Greer eye are the worst, pyros are the worst, Zonata are the worst. I said, man, I had a clutch of corns that were the worst. So it's not a species thing. And I'm a firm believer you can line breed for good feeders, right? Just like any other trait. There is this interesting paper I read about, I don't know the correct term, but scenting while the eggs are incubating with bedding from mice and things like that to get them in tune with eating. That's their meal when they emerge. So always wanted to try it, still haven't. So I just mess with lizards and pumping with Gerber's baby food or carnivore care or things like that. I typically get eggs late, which is great in my field of these type of kings because I just got to get them to the end of November and I can brumate them, right? And I've seen too, once you get metabolism started, it's hard to keep the weight on them all the way to brumation. So sometimes it's best not to even mess with them if they keep, unless you see weight loss, which some of them don't. They don't lose an ounce hardly all the way to brumation. I think a lot of snakes do that in the wild. I think they hatch later in the year and just wait for cold weather, and they don't eat until March or April the next year.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting topic just because working with mandarins, the Japanese forest rats, with them hatching out, you can even monitor their weight, and it doesn't change throughout the summer. They'll keep that same weight on, and then if you cool them, they'll come back out in the spring and just start pounding food.
Yeah. Well, they don't always do in my world. I have sometimes 2-year-olds that still haven't eaten anything, but
but they still look fine. That's kind of like the crazy part, I think.
Miniatures.
Yeah.
They got a 20-inch brother, and they're still like 7 inches long.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of interesting, even talking about, like you were talking about the rodent bedding and things like that. The most interesting one that I've heard of recently is keeping the eggs that the snake hatched out of and scenting with the.
I've done it. The yolk.
Yeah. Yep.
They don't work on all of them. Sometimes it's a trick, but yeah.
Yeah. And that's something I haven't.
Those gooey things after they hatch and then thaw them out and try it. I don't know if freezing them hurt it, but it didn't work great.
Yeah.
I bought all of the lizard scents. And 20 years ago, there was a little bottle called Lizard Maker. That didn't work for anything, right? I bought the anole juice and the gecko juice. It works for some, but not all. The best scenting method is making a puree, dipping their heads in it, and you find the lizard that they like, which is a trick sometimes. Sometimes you keep on trying geckos and anoles, and that's not even from their area, so they don't eat them. If you find a lizard that they like, then you start sending live pinks with that lizard, and then thawed, and then weaning them off, and then that's how you get there. Like I said, I mean, last year I hatched like 300 babies, and 100 of them were non-feeders, and I still got 20 or 30 that are paying.
Yeah, that's actually a question I have. So, is it about 2/3 of them will go for the mice?
Just in my experience with the lines, I gotta make that point. With the lines I have some close to wild lines, even Leonis. I got some Arambarai locality stuff, park locality stuff. But anyway, closer they are to the wild, the worse it is. But mine's usually 70% eat, 30% don't.
Oh, golly.
And I think that's kind of an interesting aspect that a lot of us take for granted in terms of captive reproduction.
And what are we doing? We're selectively breeding. We're taking the prettiest ones and keeping them, right? Mm-hmm. And we're trying to improve that or make more like that. Well, usually the pretty ones are the ones that don't eat. So we're just passing on that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and working with some wild caught animals, it's interesting because it's usually not till the third or fourth generation that you start to see animals not requiring scenting, and they take off a lot better.
Yeah, it depends on the line still too. Applegate Pyros, those are some of the worst feeders I ever had. Mine. But I hear other people saying they're great. Theirs eat fine. So I guess Bob sold the easy feeders and held back the long feeders. Right?
Yeah, I don't know. All the ones I've had over the years, I've had to tail to get going, which over time becomes very...
How many tails you got to give them, though? Because I've given tails to some for over a year, and they're not growing at all. And to keep any weight on them, it's every 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
Get a tail into them. Yeah. If you do it once a week, they start losing weight.
Yeah, and you'll see them just demise very rapidly, too, because, one of the things you kind of mentioned or hit on, I think, which is a crucial element of captive care with this group is too many people try to dial in their thermostats or set them at 88 degrees. And they're thinking like, oh, well, this environment, this tub or cage, it's going to be perfect for them.
Right.
Where really, that's where I see the Applegate enclosure style bringing on a whole different realm for captive keeping, because by giving them that variety.
So I got to make these little 300 of these little bitty Applegate enclosures. That's a good idea.
Yeah. You never know, right?
I sent y'all a picture of an old idea I had I called it the Lassiter layer tub insert. I tried to turn a tub into an Applegate enclosure. One side would be cool, and it doubled the footprint of the tub, which gave it more livable space, and it also had isolated moist side and isolated dry side. But I never thought anyone would even. I mean, back then they were buying $35 Kingsnakes. Why would they spend any more money on this?
Well, and what was it on one of the forums, Facebook forums, if you will, or pages or groups? I saw recently someone had Atriceps and they had 3D printed kind of a enclosure at the very front of the water bowl for egg laying, which I thought was kind of interesting because
I replied on that. Did you see me?
Yeah.
On that. Yep. I said, pretty good idea. I had something similar.
But you start to wonder, I mean, you could really go down a number of rabbit holes with keeping a number of different species in this style or manner.
I think these things
I've even stacked big Sterlite tubs with bulkhead PVC fittings. An old buddy of mine, he isn't old, but he's an old friend, used to stack nested tubs. He would get one deep tub and stack another deep tub in it, and it wouldn't always, you got to get the right kind to do this. And it leaves an underground space about 2 inches. And he would put a hole in the top tub that was nested inside of it so that they would have that underground area also.
Yeah. And, even this style of keeping, I don't even think just is specific to colubrids. over the years, I think many people have gone down that rabbit hole of bowline pythons.
Mhm.
And I've seen some very interesting colubrid keepers come up with very similar keeping styles in this manner of apple gate enclosures for those species and, well, that specific species, and they utilize every aspect of it.
It's all about options. I mean,
Yeah.
they might spend 80% underground, but they're going to use every bit of it when they need to.
Yeah. John, in terms of like feeding, do you do anything in terms of calcium or vitamins or supplementation with your rodents, or is everything commercially bought rodents? Do you raise your own rodents, anything like that?
I've done it all. Here in the last decade, I've just bought frozen rodents, and that's all I use.
Okay.
Thaw out. I see if you thaw out with water, I see a lot of problems with them turning it down. But if you thaw them out and just let them stay dry like they are, never see that problem. Never see any problems.
Yeah, I always just find it interesting in terms of some of the different.
There's an old I don't know if it's a wives' tale or truth that a lot of Alterna breeders were thinking that they needed to add calcium because they eat lizards in the wild. So they added calcium and then had a bunch of dead in egg babies, because they couldn't cut through the eggshell because of too much calcium. When, like I said earlier, I think they were just keeping them too wet and didn't let that dimpling and the eggshells getting brittle so they can cut them. They were just too pliable and wet. But like I said, just regular frozen rodents, I try to thaw them out dry.
Well, it's interesting even too, your incubation style. I actually keep a lot of my eggs drier over the years, and a lot of that is just purely, I think that we do keep them too moist. I think that's why you see eggs go bad. Actually, when I incubate my eggs, I actually put a layer of dry perlite on the top, even too, as well, to absorb some of that excess moisture.
Same mentality as using the light diffuser grid, right?
Yep. But also, I mean, in terms of the means which you talked about, in terms of removing either the tape or poking holes in, you almost have to wonder, even too, in the field or their natural habitat, if you aren't experiencing aspects of rain, moisture that are actually stimulating those animals to actually start to hatch. It'd be interesting even too, I mean, from your perspective, talking about some of that field biology that kind of brings it forward. Because I think you would see some of that too as well, that kind of stimulates the hatching behavior of some of these animals.
Yeah, great points.
Yeah. It's not always just a turnkey solution for this. No. We overthink or underthink a lot of it.
Well, that first clutch of eggs I found, the technique I used was very elaborate, because that's what was in the book I had. Had a 10-gallon aquarium, put a cinder block in it, and I filled it all the way up with water until the water didn't go over the cinder block. I put perlite, eggs, holes, put the eggs on the perlite in a tub on top of the cinder block, and put an aquarium heater in the water. And that's how they hatched.
Did you say you got that out of a book?
Yes, sir.
I know the book.
You saw the drawing, right?
Breeding and Keeping Snakes.
Yeah.
TFH book, because that's how I incubated my first clutch of corn snake eggs, because that's what I thought I had to do. Exact same thing.
And then a few years later was just, I threw some damp paper towels in there and they hatched. And then a few years later, I went to Hatch Right. And then I did everything. I think this is the way I'm going to do it until the day I die, is just slightly wet perlite
on top of a shelf.
Yeah.
Well, and it's crazy.
On top of the water heater before too, or in the bathroom where it's always humid.
Yep. Yeah. It's I mean, even myself, I get a lot of hack because I still use Husbandries, which is like they still do. But like my mentality around always using Husbandries was, I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket, if you will.
Literally.
So if so if one incubator went bad, which, knock on wood, I mean, those.
They'll still hatch.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. But, I mean, those things have been reliable. I still have some that are 15 years old and still working. Just on those.
Well, I grew up
for thermostats.
listening to Frank Reedus tell stories about him and Ernie Wagner doing all kinds of tests with eggs, rolling them like a chicken egg, rotating them, juggling them, throwing them back and forth. And he said they always hatched. So I never marked the top of an egg. I've dropped the clutch on the ground before and put them in there, and they still hatch. So there's a lot of rules out there which are just best case scenario, but they're pretty resilient. Eggs are. Another thing I see is if egg does go bad, or it was bad when I put it in there, in a closed system, it doesn't mold and it doesn't spread to other eggs. It just kind of shrivels up and turns color, and there's a bright white egg right in the middle of a bad clutch that never gets affected.
You know, that's kind of interesting. Just because I've had eggs go bad, and, you know, over the years I've started to just separate eggs in terms of before putting them in the enclosures to put in. But I've never had eggs kind of just spread mold across the board. Usually if it's an egg
all over the internet, I see it. Everyone show pictures of these look terrible, but they hatch. I went like, how did that happen?
Yeah. Well, and I think it kind of brings true to your point of
where you live,
them too wet where you live. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we have forward flies here too, bad. So another reason for closed system is there ain't no forward flies going in there either.
Yeah, I hate forward flies.
Me too.
There's literally, they're in here right now in my office. That's kind of cool. One of the things about the eggs that I think's pretty interesting is a lot of times when people get the eggs and you get that kind of bluish green slime fuzz that ends up on an egg. I was talking with some people here, and then it was confirmed with one of the NPR podcasts recently. That's actually that's Pseudomonas bacteria. That's actually not mold, and a lot of people think that's mold. It's you know it's going to spread, but that bacteria needs a certain level of oxygen, and the oxygen level needs to be kind of low. So that's why you kind of get a microclimate within the egg mass, and where the conditions are good for that bacteria to take out one egg. That's part of the reason why you'll see it like on one, and it doesn't do that kind of spread out across the whole clutch. Because we had that happening here at the school every now and then, and I have the benefit of having microbiologists down the hallway. So I was like, hey, what the hell is this? You know, and they were like, oh, I think it's this, blah, blah, blah. And we tested it, and sure enough, that's where it was. And I think it was the guy, I think it's Dr. Ross, who wrote the Blue Bible for pythons. When Eric and Owen interviewed him, he talked about that, like literally the week that I found that out. So that's pretty cool. So I've got some questions. If we could switch gears a little bit, maybe to just field herping. You said that's kind of where their passions lie. How does being a herpetoculturist impact you as a herper? Does it, or do you get more of an impact being a herper helping you be a herpetoculturist? This is a question I've wanted to ask people.
I think it's the latter. Like I said, I think my passion is field herping. Finding a target species is better than watching eggs hatch, and watching eggs hatch is pretty damn cool, right?
Yep.
So learning about what they do in the wild and when they do it helps. I think it helps become a better snake keeper.
Agree 100%.
Yeah. There's people that do it the other way. I mean, they keep a lot and they herp every now and then. I think first and foremost, learning how they live is the best.
So has there been experiences you've had in the field, and then you were back in the snake room and trying to figure something out, and you basically thought, well, the Alterna do X, Y, and Z or whatever, maybe I should try this, and it helped?
Well, yeah, with all these things being nocturnal and living in tight places, I think they live in these tight, dark places not only to hide from predators, but let's say you take a wash rag and you get it soaking wet. and you lay it out flat. And you get another wash rag and you wad it up. Which one's going to dry out faster, right? The one that you laid out flat. So these things are not only protecting themselves from predators and these dark cracks, they're also protecting themselves from dehydration, losing moisture and stuff. So I try. I mean, a lot of people complain about sizes of tubs, but I told you earlier the size I use is like a 28 to 32 quart, and these snakes don't get big that I keep. I mean, they're all around 3-foot snakes. So my rule is diagonally across the tub. If they can fully stretch out, then it's big enough. Some of them are half the perimeter of the tub is big enough, and I'm probably 99% good on my own rule. Some of them were a little cramped, but it happens. Even an Applegate enclosure, they're not huge, right? But they have so much climbing up and down, corner to corner, climbing all the way to the top of the tub. I mean, they get plenty of, I don't know if you want to call it enrichment. I don't want to use it, but there's plenty of exercise and them hunting meals. I mean, I don't always put them in the same place, right? A lot of the times they see me come in and they're above ground. They just haul ass underground either to run from me, or that's usually where I put the meal. They know that there's a meal coming. So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember like 15 years ago.
Places dark tight.
Oh, no.
Dark tight places is what mine like in the wild and in captivity.
Yeah, no, going off of your enclosure size, I remember like 15 years ago having some Lemke line Ruthveni, and I don't have them anymore. Those were a pain.
I have a F2 and an F3 still.
Oh man. But I remember if you put them in too big of an enclosure, those things just stopped feeding.
Yeah. Well, babies are like that too. I see a lot of information online. Bigger the better. I said, well, not when they're little, right? Unless you clutter it up enough where there's 30 different hides in a big, you know what I mean? Then maybe. Then you got to find it to feed it because it's not coming out. Lemke line. I had a Lloyd Lemke. Can I tell a little story?
Go for it.
Lloyd Lemke found an Almialco Ruthveni in 1983, the year before the Lacey Act. It was a male, guessed to be around 3 years old. Found some females from the same area, started breeding them, and they started producing aberrant Ruthveni, which led to the stripes and the super stripes, which we all tried to make back in the day. There's one person that kind of perfected it finally, Ed Lanning. But anyway, this snake lived a very, very long time. I got it when it was 27 years old in 2010, I think it was, and it bred for me. I sent it back to the late Shannon Brown in 2013 at the age of 33. So it was 30 years old. I think it bred for me in 2008. That's why I have my dates off a little bit. But it was 27 when it bred for me, and I gave it back to Shannon at the age of 33. That's how I still have the F2s and F3s.
Oh, wow.
Wow. So was that particular animal, so that was the animal that was taken from the wild?
So hatched in probably 1980. And at 2013, I gave it back, and I think it passed away shortly after that.
That's crazy.
So this thing had dimples. Every scale had a dimple. I had to help it shed. Had cataracts in both eyes. Loved to eat and loved to breed still.
No, that's the way
it's
to go
amazing. Out. Yeah. No, and it's so wild when you talk to experienced keepers in terms of the age of some of the animals that they still have in their collections.
Right.
Where I think sometimes where we talk about newer keepers,
they don't understand. Go live 20 plus years, no problem.
Yeah. Some keepers think 10 years is extremely long for keeping some of these animals, and they just don't understand the age.
I don't think a female Montane king, I'm talking about still, I don't think a female peaks until age 9. So when they're age 3 or 4, sometimes 5 if they're slow, start breeding, they start laying small clutches. And then the next couple of years, those clutch sizes increase. And then about age 9, that's their max clutch. You get 12, 13, 14 eggs from a Leonis, right? Mm-hmm. And then after that, it starts going downhill, but then it kind of plateaus. It gets down to where they lay about 4 or 5 eggs, and that's it. Even into their 20s until the day they die, they kind of hit their peak and they drop a little bit and plateau. A lot of people think a 9-year-old's an old worn-out breeder. We need to get rid of it, right?
Yeah.
Good golly.
Yeah, no, that it's very interesting in terms of some of the things that I think even in publications, not only in hobby aspects in terms of literature that we read, but also in scientific literature, we don't fully capture in terms of a lot of that captive reproduction.
Yep.
Even Zach working on his books here too. I mean, a lot of the captive or even natural biology of reproductive biology comes from the hobby. And a lot of it, I think, is very beneficial when we get people like yourself, John, that not only have the field herping side, but also the captive side, where you kind of bring things full circle to kind of the hobby standard. Well, no, perfecting the hobby, if you will, in terms of keeping style.
Yep. The main thing I've learned is males are good until the day they die, right? Kind of like humans.
Wow. Nice. So, is there a member of this complex that, I guess this is a double question. Within this group of snakes, is there one that's your favorite, and is there one that's more like your nemesis, or are they all kind of the same? Or, what are your thoughts on that? Just since you're kind of the guy and you've
it's a 2 or 3 part answer also. Yeah. My favorite, because I can go find them, is Alterna.
Gotcha.
If I could just drive down to Valle de los Fantasmas and find Mex, they would be up there with them too, right? Mm-hmm. My favorite, due to variability, but I can't go catch any, is Leonis.
Gotcha.
My nemesis is probably everyone's nemesis is Zanata. I have never produced a Zanata in my life, and I haven't tried because I haven't kept them a lot. I tried maybe 5 years ago with a trio I had, didn't get anything. That was the last time I tried. So Zanata are probably my nemesis. Mm-hmm. I still produce all the others. Ruth Vinay, not a lot of people working with them anymore, so they're kind of up there as one of my favorites. They were the first out of the complex. Nope, they were the second out of the complex to be giving species status. Gartska did back in the day. Mm-hmm. Those same Gartska animals, Terry Herring got some of them and produced the first albino tricolor ever in 1987. One that no one has and only a handful of people on Earth have ever seen is Nipropiltus webi. Y'all know Rob Bryson, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He got that named as a species back in 2011 or 2010, something like that. There's only been 2 live ones found since that clipped one, almost DOR, was found. That's it. It's a bad part of Mexico, though.
Yeah, you gotta be careful.
That's why there hasn't been much found since then. Mm-hmm. It could have been like the olden days, like everyone went down to Rancho Santa Barbara and got greer eye for like 20 years solid. Everyone just went to Rancho Santa Barbara and got greer eye. So 99.9% of our greer eye in captivity, our locality, they're all Rancho Santa Barbara. No one hardly says that. I mean, there are a few traceable back to there, but most of them have lost that lineage, but we know what they are. They're all Rancho Santa Barbara. F20.
Interesting. F20.
That's kind of another interesting segue, I think, is, John, what are your thoughts on locality-specific animals as they relate to the hobby? I mean, you brought up Alterna.
Locality reigns king is all I'm going to say, but I'll say more. As long as biologists and scientists and herpetologists change names, change species, change subspecies, lump, split, I can still say this is where they're from, right? Mm-hmm. So I think locality is key. I mean, last year it was, 5 years ago it was a Texas rat. Now it's a Western rat, right? I can still say, well, it's from this area regardless. A lot of people do it thinking that they're producing exactly what could happen in the wild, and that ain't the reason I'm doing it. The whole morph mining, I love breeding F1s together to see what hidden traits are there, right? I think we're not producing what could be found in the wild, even if we find something 10 feet find a female 10 feet from a male on 2 different nights, right? Because unless you throw a female in with 5 males and see what happens, then you might be getting closer to what the wild can produce, because multiple males can fertilize eggs. The funnest part is pairing up a locality, right? It took me 2 years to find my first Alterna. Then I take my buddy Chris Painshaw out there, and in 2 seconds, he fumbles and turns on his light, and there's one right in his beam. Right? So it's fun pairing up things, because you just hit an area and keep hitting it until you find one, and it's, like I said, way better than watching eggs hatch and feeding those things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have a lot of locality Splendida, locality Pyros, locality Alterna, somewhat locality Leonis, many locality Annulata, and those are, I used to have 100 or more California Kings, only a few locality. I'm down to just the locality ones. Kind of gotten away from mutants and started. That's my passion, is Walcott, F1s, F2s. That's about it.
Very cool.
But we're stuck on, like I said, with Ruth Vini and Leonis and Mex-Mex. We're stuck with whatever we got. So we're just line breeding now for those. And I'm getting some crazy looks out of some Mex-Mex that haven't been seen before. And these neon orange Leonis, those aren't found in the wild, but they still look cool, right?
Mm-hmm. Do you think you have enough genetic diversity with the Mex-Mex?
Yeah, I wanted to get that into with y'all. I forgot to even write that down, but I think Elevation Kings breed each other in the wild. Mm-hmm. They're isolated to a population. So I bred successive generations, 4 generations in a row, and still haven't seen any trouble at all with needing new bloodlines. The reason we need new bloodlines is just to have a different look, or you get kind of jaded. The same thing, yeah. But yeah, lowland creatures like lowland snakes, grassland snakes like Splendida and Milks. I really haven't bred multiple generations to even know, but those are the ones that I would want to reintroduce and have a diverse genetic field to play instead of just line breeding now.
Can we talk about Splendida a little bit?
Sure.
Cool with that, because I do know those guys, and I happen to have more than a couple at my house right now. So I'm taking it with the locality thing. Then you've collected them, or
yes, sir.
Yeah. So
and have some others have collected, and some from lines others have collected.
What is there a magic? This is the naturalist in me talking now. Are there like conditions where you're out herping and you're like, oh, this is going to be a Splendida night, kind of thing, or is there are population levels at a point where you can pretty much bumble onto them any night?
It depends on where you're looking. South Texas, you very, very slim chance you will road cruise one. You would have to go flip them. 90% I found were flipped. Very few road cruise in South Texas. West Texas, you can find 8 a night on the right conditions, right? Mm-hmm. They like it a little cooler. They like nights to get into the low 70s. South Texas doesn't get into the low 70s in the summer. Our low's like 82. So West Texas is the easiest place to find them. And if you hit the grasslands at night, around 74 degrees seems to be like the magic number. Mexican Milks is around 78 degrees in South Texas, right? Mm-hmm. But we have these ranges. Like most Mexican milks are found from, some people say the 60s. I found 50 in my life or so, and none have been in the 60s. 74 to 81 has been that range. Mexican milks, like I said, in 2 different parts of the state, and even in the Arizona, it's usually low 70s.
Interesting.
Humidity is a thing too. So there's a south, like hunting West Texas is all about where did it rain last, or where is the southeast wind blowing from. So blowing that moisture off the Gulf into West Texas helps.
That's
and then there's barometric pressure. When that southeast wind's blowing, you usually have a low going on counterclockwise, right? When that high pressure's going, you don't have any wind, and you got high pressure there. There's not much movement. So I got a buddy just last week found 3 Alterna in 2 nights. So he goes back again this weekend, 0 because of high pressure.
You know, that's like one of the most interesting parts I find with locality-specific animals is just what you're mentioning. Is just like their natural realm, barometric pressure, seeing how animals are actually found, how they're actually using their environment.
And the time of the year. So
yeah,
for Alterna, since we were talking about Alterna, well, we were talking about Splendida. Sorry, I got back to.
No, that's fine.
We hunt the eastern range first at the beginning. May, June, July, it starts getting too hot. So up in the mountains at elevation, July, August, September is where we go. September, when it starts cooling off, then we try to hit everywhere again before the end of the season. Then October, we come look for milk snakes again in South Texas. And then we ain't got nothing again until May.
I was just about to ask, is there anything moving in the winter, or is winter?
Indigos. I mean, we can find indigos in the winter. They breed kind of late in the year, November, December.
Have you found those, the Texas indigos?
Yeah.
Oh my God, man!
I mean,
how can you just nonchalantly be like, "Oh well, you know, there's indigos in the winter."
I see a lot of DORs, but I see a here.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
If I targeted them, I can find more a year, but I don't even target them because they've been on the blacklist so long.
Yeah,
they were endangered, protected. They got taken off the endangered, protected list, but they're still on what we call our Texas blacklist, where we can't commercially collect them, but we can collect them. But if you have a non-game dealer's permit, you can't collect them, anything on the blacklist. And if we want to keep anything native, we're supposed to have a non-game dealer's permit. So it's weird rules that we've been fighting for 20 years. But
holy Moses, that's pretty awesome. Sorry, I'm a little gobsmacked right now that you just have dry market.
Come on down, we'll find some.
You did it. You invited me. I'm like the tick. I'm gonna come. All right. Dang. Okay. So I guess final couple questions here. What do you think the future of the hobby is? The hobby right now is just in this weird spot where there's facets of it that are great, and then there's facets of it that are disgusting, and then there's other facets we're not going to talk about, and then there's facets where there's hope. Like, it's all over the place. It just kind of depends on what you're talking about. So you have a really cool perspective because you've been doing this for a while.
It's cyclic for sure. I know more about the niche market I'm in, which is Kingsnakes, mainly the Mexican Kingsnakes. I know a lot about the Getula market, except for the eastern stuff that I don't mess with a lot, like Getula and Brookside, Floridana, stuff like that. But don't want to reiterate, but like I said, when I came in the early 90s, it was a Colubrid market. There were very few people with Burmese balls and retics and Colombian boas and stuff like that. Before the internet, I only knew people in South Texas too. So it was all, let's go find all these snakes that we have here. Then I saw the Honduran milk craze, which kind of boosted Colubrids in the early 2000s. And then I saw ball pythons, crested geckos, leopard geckos, cargo geckos take over every show I ever went to for probably 15, 20 years. And like we were talking about earlier, just this year, last year, we started seeing more people with Colubrids on their tables, right? So Hognose was a part of that. Everyone liked Hognose. Yeah. They're Colubroids, I know, or they're not really Colubrids. Mexican Black Kings. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, that's very interesting. What were your thoughts on that? Crazy.
To us, it was the poor man's indigo, or right? We were getting them for $30 a piece before, just 4 years ago, and then everyone wanted $200 for them, which is good because I look at my snake saying, "Well, that's worth more than NBK."
Yeah.
Right. So I just thought that was interesting. I see everyone freaking out when they see an NBK with pattern, and I said, "Well, that's all we had back in the day. We hatch NBKs out, and they all look like Splendida, and they just got dark with age." Line breeding in captivity has made everyone think that they should be solid black right out of the egg. So they scream hybrid. I see Colubrids continuing until the next big thing pops up. I mean, I don't think we should plateau. I think it should be continuing to be popular from here on out, depending on laws and these Cobra keepers letting them out and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Go ahead.
My big question to you is, if you could add any species to your collection now, what would it be?
Webbi.
I mean, you had it. Webbi?
Webbi. Yeah. That was like, bam, Webbi.
Done. All right.
Makes total sense.
I just need to catch about 5 or 6, bring them back. There's been people trying to get things, herpetologists, scientists, biologists, trying to get animals back from Mexico for years, and they still haven't figured it out. The only person I know that's truly figured out something is Jason Wagner, Project Abronia, about 10, 15 years ago. I used to keep Abronia, by the way. Worst bid I ever got was by Abronia, because they try to make their teeth touch after they bite you. Jason Wagner went down there and convinced governments, local governments, local state governments, that they were need to be protected, right? So he set up a program with collecting all of these, setting up a breeding program in Mexico, and releasing half into the wild and bringing half back to the States. Now, I know personal breeders in Mexico that can only sell in Mexico. They can't get anything out. And I've tried to get animals legally, and I can't figure it out. Like I said, Robert Hansen can't figure it out. Robert Hansen's been going over there for 30, 40 years and working with Lascano, who is the herpetologist of the Nuevo Leon University there. And they can't figure out any legal way to do it. So Webbi is always on the top of the list because no one has them, and hell, they look cool. They look like what a Noblekai and a Greerai would look like, and they're right in between ranges too, right?
That's nuts.
Taxonomy. I said Noblekai. Now you can find Noblekai in Arizona, even though they look like pyros. So I think that needs some work.
Yeah.
Yes. Our good friend Taxonomy comes up in every episode.
Yeah, and that's why locality's king. I don't care what y'all call it. This is where I found them, or this is where they're from, right?
No, that's a very, very... I've never heard it pointed out that way, but that's a very valid point. Yeah. And if you keep those... if you honor the locality and you don't mix this locality with that locality, then when a new name pops up, you're not going to be dealing with hybrids that weren't hybrids 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So
that's what I don't like about the lumping. I've got to a point, and it's on my own accord, and some others do it too, where every subspecies that there used to be, I just drop the trinomial name, and I just use a binomial name saying everything's its own species now. When I sell them or tell people what I work with, because I don't want them breeding a Lampropeltis mexicana ruthveni to a Lampropeltis mexicana mex-mex just because they're interspecies hybrid. I mean, you know what I mean? So I do it with all the Getula now. I still say Infralabialis. I still say Wooden Eye. I still say everything.
The general trend in science right now is that if you have a phenotype that is really distinct, it's got a geographic barrier that's kind of well known and understood. Whenever people do these revisions, it seems like the subspecies status is dropped, and then you elevate the species. So that's a totally valid thing. And I'm not
like what they did. I like what they did with Emery I and Slowinski
Yep.
I, and they made them all subs, which I like that. At least they resurrected Milmorum, which is a 6 foot heavy bodied snake, not a little 3 foot brown snake up north. All right.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking, no one's perfected nuclear DNA yet, right? We're only using mitochondrial DNA, and it's only one side of the story, right?
It's literally one. It's like the mom side of the story.
I'm not a biologist, so I don't want to get too deep into it. But eventually, they're going to say they're all snakes, right? Keep right? They're all snakes.
Well,
I'm from the old school where scale counts and phenotype played part into speciation. So why can't we bring some of that back?
Well, people are trying to. There's an idea called the integrated species concept, which I don't really hear herpers talking about it, but that's exactly what it is. It's where you use all the evidence.
Well, I like the last paper on Milmorum. It showed that integration with the different colors on the map. Yep.
And if you think about that paper and what I just said with elevating, the MRI group, there's not really a solid geographic barrier. Like they all kind of merge, but you end up with a regional phenotype in response to the habitats they're in, which is literally the definition of a subspecies. So
the Tamaulipan thorn scrub habitat does stop pretty close to the line where Emery starts.
Yeah, exactly.
And like Pituophis, Sei versus Affinis, the hill country and grasslands and thorn scrubs stop right around the Pecos River. Then it turns into the Chihuahuan Desert. So there's a few with some barriers. Something interesting, I don't know if everyone's read my article, but not everyone knows that, and this may not be in my article, but Eastern Range Blairii, which are Lampropeltis alterna Blair's phase, they used to be a separate species at one time. Mexicana blairii and Mexicana alterna. Mitochondrial DNA shows milk snake genetics in them.
Oh, that's cool.
So check this out. That's the eastern part of the range where corals are, where milks, annulata mainly are. Then you start finding Salinops, like west of Sanderson area. Down in Mexico, the eastern range Lampropeltis leonis is milk snake phase. Right? The eastern range, eastern and southern range Mex-Mex are banded and look closer to Ruthveni. There's also been banded griri found, not just saddled griri. So all of these snakes are so similar in that there's a banded phase and a saddled phase.
That's cool.
Except for Ruthveni. They're all banded. Webi we don't know enough about. So the ones that, when we were talking about Therai earlier, the ones that he found, that Army General guy Thayer, the ones that he found were banded, so that's why they were named separate.
Ah, gotcha.
We're afraid Therai might be resurrected. And I said, if y'all do, y'all better resurrect Blairii too. But because, then we got a bunch of hybrids in captivity. So things like that happen even in the U.S. When you start saying, oh, these are all eastern rats. Well, I can breed a green to a yellow to a gray now, right? That's why I say locality is still king.
Yeah, that's a great place to end it. Is locality is still king.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. This has been wonderful, John.
Hope so.
I learned a lot. This is a group of snakes that I have been intimidated by for a long time, and I think that this is going to serve as a great intro for people that might be interested and they just want to go to place to. You can only learn so much from an article. When you're talking to somebody that knows what they're talking about and they've been doing it forever, that experience is king. And I'm real happy we have this recorded.
Great.
So thank you much, man. So on that token, if anybody is fascinated by these animals, they want to get a hold of you, they're interested in potentially purchasing your stock, what's the best way for people to reach out and find you?
Well, 2 places, Facebook and Instagram, and it's both Captive Ben, Coastal Ben Captive Breeding, no spaces, and you'll find me both on Facebook and Instagram. But this year is not a good year to contact me to purchase because there wasn't a lot hatched for a lot of reasons I won't get into, but next year will be the year again.
So you're jumping back into it hardcore?
Oh, well, I produced, like I said, 300 babies last year. This year I had to prolong my brumation because of work. The freeze screwed up a lot of things at work and made it go longer. My dad passed away. A lot of things happened. And I got everything out late, and there was some syncing issues. Not everything was synced up. Some things didn't even ovulate. I managed to get like 40 eggs, but all right.
Yeah, that's still good.
I'll be back.
There you go. Okay. So, this wraps up our episode with John. I'm certain we're going to have John back. I'd love to do a field herping episode. I'd love to do an establishing wild caughts in captivity episode. There's plenty to be talking about. And in American circles, John's really well known.
Am I?
His work. Yeah, you're pretty well known.
I've been told that I'm shy, don't talk to anyone, and kind of a recluse.
Nah. I knew about you before this, and I knew you were the Mex guy. So there you go. But so this is what episode number are we on here? 4? Is that right? Number 4. Yep. So if you want to get a hold of me, I'm just Zach Loafman on Facebook, Dr. Crawdad on Instagram, or Zach Loafman. You can search both. That's me. Where can they find you, Matt?
Sarpamitra and Sarpamitra USA on Instagram.
Okay. And then, as always, we're proud members of the MPR network. There's a ton of podcasts, and every episode I say that I'm going to list them all, and once again, I forgot to print them all out. So, anywho, I was listening to the Monitor podcast, though, yesterday while I was cleaning cages, and they made a suggestion of maybe just making a standardized ending for all of the podcasts where they're all listed. And Colubrid and Colubroid Radio are on, we're fans of that idea. That'd be kind of nice. So anyway, with that being said, this was a fantastic episode. Hope you liked it. As always, if you want to give us ideas for future episodes and guests, please hit us up. And with that, have a great one. Later.